They called it Earth, a damp, oxygen-choked sphere nestled in a backwater arm of the spiral. I visited once. I remember the smell. You know the scent when a recycling core begins to leak, rust, heat, and organic decay? Multiply that by 10 and add optimism. That's Earth. It always amazed me how they even made it to space. Their launch vehicles still use combustion, fire, if you can believe it. Their transmissions are littered with what they call memes, digital artifacts of self-deprecating humor that their primitive minds seem to find inspiring. It would be charming if it weren't so annoying. So naturally, when the Galactic Accord decided to welcome them, it wasn't for their brilliance. It was containment. Wrap them in treaties, smile at their songs, and keep them busy with trade routes no one cared about. Like giving a child a toy steering wheel so they think they're driving the ship. And oh, how they smiled at the ceremony. Their representative, a female named Margaret Wills, wore a red suit, not armored, just red. She handed out chocolates, of all things, sugar cubes wrapped in colorful foil. Some of my colleagues actually ate them. Fools. The peace treaty was signed on Platform 17 of Lithari Station. I was there. I stood 2 steps behind Chancellor Krexer, suppressing laughter as the humans paraded their pride. They actually applauded themselves after the signing, as if they had done something meaningful. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that their new trade access lanes were designed to expose their outer colonies. Slow, predictable jumps, weak escort protocols. Their most isolated installation, Juno Colony, sat like a gift-wrapped prize on the edge of contested space. So when 7 of their colonists went missing 3 rotations ago, no one expected backlash. A minor incident, no alarms, no formal complaints, and yet they haven't responded. That's the strange part. We expected noise, accusations, perhaps even sanctions. But the humans, they've gone quiet. No press release, no blustering ambassador demanding justice, just silence. Amusingly, some of my colleagues interpret this as acceptance. They know their place, one said. They understand they can't win, said another. I, of course, know better. They're probably busy creating another meme. 3 cycles after the incident, a human delegation requested an audience with the Accord's High Council. Naturally, we accepted. Their presence was, frankly, becoming an annoyance. The humans had begun sending polite follow-ups about logistical misalignments and personnel delays regarding their outer colonies. They never mentioned the missing transport directly. Typical primate politeness, an evolutionary holdover from needing to avoid being eaten. They arrived on Varela Prime aboard one of their blocky, rust-colored vessels, long-range diplomatic class, though it looked like it was designed by someone with a grudge against aerodynamics. Still, it landed. That in itself is a minor miracle. I watched them exit the shuttle from my balcony on Council Tower 9. The lead human was a male, tall, silver-haired, with a limp. His name was Commander Ellis Grant, though he wore no armor, no weapon, no insignia save for a small silver pin. Behind him, 5 others followed, none armed. They walked like they didn't need to be. Their expressions were unreadable, not hostile, not friendly, just calm. They're better actors than I gave them credit for, I remember thinking. Inside the council chamber, our chancellor began the pleasantries. Speeches were exchanged. A gesture of goodwill here, a hollow phrase there. The human said very little until Grant was invited to speak. He stepped forward, adjusted his cuff, and looked around the room of 67 species with all the excitement of someone reading a cereal box. Then he spoke. 3 weeks ago, 7 of our citizens disappeared on Lithari Station. The words struck like a plasma bolt. He said it plainly. No anger, no demands, just a statement of fact. We have reviewed your surveillance logs. None show them leaving the station, yet they're gone. Strange. He glanced at the chancellor. We're hoping you can clarify what happened. We don't believe in jumping to conclusions. I heard one of the Teltari ambassadors whisper something about restraint. Another called them reasonable. But I noticed something different. Grant didn't blink. Not once. The chancellor, well-rehearsed in diplomatic sidestepping, gave some polished reply about shared security protocols and reviewing the matter with transparency. He smiled his 6-lipped smile. Grant nodded once, then added, We were hoping you'd make this mistake. That was the moment the room went still. It was subtle, almost polite, but every translator lit up red. Not a threat, but something worse. a confession of expectation. He continued, Earth believes in peace. It's written in our charter. It's something we choose, not something we're bound by. And just like that, the audience was over. No shouting, no drama. They left the chamber back to their awkward ship and departed without ceremony. That night, I replayed his words 3 times. We were hoping you'd make this mistake. It echoed in my thoughts like static across neural links, not because of what it meant, but because he said it before we even denied anything. I must admit, I began monitoring human channels more closely after that meeting. Not just the official transmissions. They're bland and bureaucratic, filled with phrases like mutual understanding and continuity of operations. No, I wanted to see the cracks, the rants, the fury, the instinctual outburst of a species too primitive to contain its rage. But it never came. Their news networks ran polite inquiries. Analysts speculated about navigation errors. Their spokespeople said, investigations are ongoing. Their military, silent. Even their social channels, where one might expect outrage or panic, remained disturbingly cold. Memes, yes, jokes about space bureaucracy. A popular one depicted a cartoon council ambassador opening a folder labeled, Oops. The humans were laughing at us. The Accord's internal council convened 4 times over the next week to discuss the situation. Some called for placating measures, a minor compensation package, symbolic gestures. A few even suggested quietly replacing the missing colonists, perhaps a staged rescue operation. That idea was shut down, of course. You can't simply clone 7 diplomats and expect no one to notice. Humans are too sentimental for that sort of trickery. They count their dead. Still, we did what we always do. Stall. Bury them in polite delays. Let the scandal fade. Surely Earth would move on. What other option did they have? Then came the signal. It wasn't on a diplomatic channel, not even military grade. It was intercepted by a civilian relay buoy on the edge of the Rendell Drift, a 5-second burst, encoded in low-frequency pulses, deliberately primitive, so basic that most of our AIs marked it as trash data. But an old analyst from the Threxan Corps noticed the pattern. It was Morse code, human Morse code, only 5 words. We never lost those 7. We played it on loop in the chamber. One of the generals barked, Then where the hell are they? No one answered. And then someone noticed, again, far too late, that the relay buoy that picked up the message, it wasn't one of ours. It was human-made, a throwaway monitoring node left from a colonization attempt 2 decades ago. It should have been dead. It was operational, powered, broadcasting, right on our border. No distress beacon, no comms chatter, just sitting there, watching. And we had never seen it. That night, I reviewed old footage from Lithari Station, the last known sighting of the 7 humans. They boarded a diplomatic shuttle headed for Docking Ring 3, except there's no record of it departing. No explosion, no sabotage. It simply vanished, gone. We never lost those 7. Those words haunt me, not just because they imply a lie, but because they were confident, not defiant, not angry, certain. I watched humans for decades. I mocked their culture, their chaos, their contradictions. But this was something else. They weren't reacting. They were waiting. Denev 4 was considered a quiet posting, an out-of-the-way research facility orbiting a mineral-rich dead moon, mostly automated, staffed by a few dozen Accord scientists, and guarded by a contingent of low-priority militia, a backwater assignment for backwater mines, the kind of place nothing happens for decades. Then 3 days ago, something did happen. A containment breach triggered a Class 4 lockdown protocol. Internal comms cut, perimeter sealed. Automated distress beacons fired through 3 separate networks. Our response fleet arrived in under 2 hours and found nothing. No combat damage, no sign of an external attack, but the facility was empty. Every living being gone. No bodies, no blood, just silence. Except one thing, a phrase scrawled into the inner walls of the command center, burned into the alloy with surgical precision. You shouldn't have lied. No name, no insignia, just those 4 words, placed where every camera would see. We scanned for life signs, none. We checked escape pods, all present. Power systems were still functioning. There were even meals half-eaten in the mess hall. It was as if every organic being had been plucked out in an instant, and we had no idea how. The Council's intelligence branch, in its infinite wisdom, proposed gravitational destabilization or subatomic phase extraction. Nonsense, really. They forget that sometimes the simplest explanation is the most terrifying, because the humans had been there. We confirmed it 2 hours later when a motion-triggered system in the storage hangar uploaded a short video to the Accord's network. A grainy, low-resolution feed of 6 figures in matte black suits moving through the corridor with perfect synchronicity. No insignia, no faces, no visible weapons, except for the 7th. Standing at the center was Ellis Grant. He looked straight into the camera as if he knew exactly where it would be. Then he said, "We're just getting started," and the video cut. That line, calm, unhurried, nearly whispered, broke whatever illusions the council still held. This wasn't a reactive strike. This wasn't retaliation. This was orchestration. We didn't even know Denev 4 was on humanity's star charts. It wasn't near any human trade routes, nor did it serve any political function. It was just a place. And somehow they reached it. We checked the perimeter logs. No unauthorized jump signatures. No breaches in the quantum anchor net. It should be impossible. I asked one of our data engineers, a Kroll Thin named Veltura, how it could happen. He looked pale, shaken. Even for a species that doesn't sweat, he looked like he was sweating. "They didn't come through the perimeter," he whispered. "They were already inside." Inside, the words chilled me, because the only way that made sense is if they were planted long before the breach, long before the treaty, maybe even long before we noticed humanity in the first place. How long had they been watching? Or worse, how long had they been waiting? There is a particular kind of silence that precedes war. Not the drumbeat of rising tension, nor the posturing of fleets. That kind of noise is common, expected, even welcomed in diplomatic circles. No, the silence I speak of is colder, deeper, a calculated absence. It came 4 days after Denev 4. Every human envoy withdrew from Accord territories. Quietly, neatly, not a single formal protest or reason given. Just sudden schedule revisions and transport requests. Their embassies were locked down. Their civilian stations went dark. Commercial transmissions ceased. And then the leaks began. Not from human networks, from ours. Sensitive documents started appearing across unsecured nodes. Troop deployments, sensor blind spots, classified black site coordinates. Nothing catastrophic on its own, but each one razor precise, humiliating, and always with a timestamp that showed the data had been exfiltrated weeks ago. It was a warning, not a blast, but a whisper. The council finally convened in full emergency session. Accusations flew. Accords were cited. Some demanded war, others urged de-escalation. But even the warmongers spoke with uncertainty. The humans hadn't fired a single shot, and still they were winning. I remained silent through the first hours of debate. I was trying to make sense of it, of him, Ellis Grant. Every time he appeared, it was where he should not be. Every word he spoke echoed with layers I didn't understand. I reviewed his file again. Former naval intelligence, retired, diplomatic attaché, awarded no medals, no scandal. He barely existed in the Accord's predictive models. And yet he was at the center of everything. The Chancellor tried to regain control with what he called a preemptive gesture. A show of strength, he said. We would send 3 carriers to the edge of human territory. Just a signal. A line in the stardust. The fleet launched within 8 hours. They never made it past the fold gate. The gate itself collapsed mid-jump. Not exploded, collapsed. Space around it folded in, devouring the structure and every vessel within. It was believed impossible. Our science teams called it grav shell inversion. The only known method requires over a dozen Singularity-class reactors and enough energy to drain a sun. We possessed no such capability, but someone did. And 5 seconds before the collapse, every sensor station in a 50-light-year radius received the same message. Do not follow us. No signature, no metadata, just text. The Chancellor has not spoken since. As for me, I find myself waking in the middle of our night cycles, checking door seals, reviewing comm logs, imagining shadows that are probably just illusions. The silence is broken, but not in the way we feared, not with noise, with precision. We've always trusted the simulations. Entire civilizations are governed by them. War forecasts, trade protocols, behavioral predictions. Every galactic power has fed its neural banks with centuries of data. Civil unrest, genetic trends, probability matrices. Anything that can be measured can be modeled. It's how the Accord avoided collapse during the Karathi famines, and how we absorbed the Alexei Empire without firing a shot. The simulations predicted humanity would cry foul, maybe withdraw from the treaty, perhaps even lash out in one isolated strike. Nothing beyond that. Their fleet was too small, their influence too new, their culture too emotionally volatile. But the simulations were wrong. Hopelessly, laughably wrong. The grav shell collapse at the fold gate should have been a statistical anomaly, a 1 in a billion occurrence, unprovoked and spontaneous. But the humans signaled it. That meant intent. That meant capability, which meant we never understood them at all. So we ran the simulations again and again and again. 17,000 models, adjusted inputs, expanded parameters, emotional variance mapping. Every single simulation failed within 5 cycles. Humanity always won, sometimes militarily, sometimes economically. In one disturbing variant, they dissolved the accord from the inside by manipulating trade guild elections over 47 years. In another, they weaponized communication protocols into psychological warfare. There was no pattern. And that was the problem. Humanity didn't play to win battles. They played to break games. A Threxan analyst, we call her Yuin, stood up during the 5th simulation briefing and asked the question no one dared voice. What if they planned all of this before the treaty? Silence. Not disbelief, but the quiet terror of realization. What if the colonists weren't taken? What if they volunteered? What if Denev 4 wasn't a target, but a message? What if Ellis Grant wasn't reacting? What if he'd been waiting? I returned to my private quarters after that briefing. For the first time in my professional life, I locked the door. I activated local shielding. I sat alone with the lights dimmed. And I replayed an old human interview from their early space age. A woman in a uniform, calm, focused, deadly serious, speaking about deterrence. "You build peace," she said, "by making war so costly that no one ever wants to try it." And it struck me. That was the mistake. We assumed their restraint was weakness. We saw their patience as passivity. We believed the smiles, the gifts, the jokes, the endless attempts at cooperation were all they had. But what if all of it was a calculated illusion? What if every handshake was the placement of a knife no one saw until it was too late? The simulations didn't just fail, they collapsed, just like the fold gate. When the alarms triggered on Valtor Prime, no one believed it at first. The Citadel of Archives, our most secure facility, buried within an asteroid hollowed out and shielded against gravitational drift, was breached, not destroyed, not infiltrated, breached. It took 12 minutes for Accord response units to arrive. 12 minutes too long. All security systems had been looped. Sensors fed false data. No visual contact, no signs of physical tampering. Just 24 servers missing data cores. And nothing else touched. No stolen tech. No weapons cache disturbed. Not even the automated rations lifted from storage. But one thing was left behind. In the chamber where the cores had been extracted, etched directly into the reinforced obsidian of the wall, in perfect old high Accord script, "You are not the only ones who archive things." That was the moment we realized humanity wasn't trying to cripple us. They were studying us, watching, cataloging, and worse, they knew what to ignore. Every security official expected an attack on shipyards, fuel depots, capital nodes, but humans had walked past hundreds of critical systems and touched only what mattered most to them. Our knowledge. One technician, a young Surinai who hadn't slept in 2 cycles, pointed something out in the access logs. Every data core that had been removed contained information on pre-Accord conflicts, battle tactics, suppressed revolts, biological weapon trials, old sins we had long buried, files no one outside the council knew existed. They hadn't stolen secrets. They'd taken receipts. We sealed the Citadel, encrypted all knowledge vaults, scrambled emergency protocols, but there was a hollowness in our effort, a futility we didn't speak of, because if they could reach there, they could reach anywhere, and they didn't stay. That was the most unsettling part. This was not conquest, not colonization, not even sabotage. This was demonstration. They arrived. They moved through the heart of our civilization. They took nothing and left one message. We scrambled to issue a galaxy-wide statement, a claim that we had detected anomaly traces, nothing more. A meteor burst, sensor ghosts, deny, reframe, deflect, but the humans didn't respond. They didn't issue threats. They didn't broadcast demands. They didn't have to, because by now, every power in the Accord, every species, every sector, every council chamber was filled with one thought. Where will they go next? No one wanted to say Earth out loud, even fewer wanted to say Ellis Grant. But I did, in private, in the quiet of my sealed quarters. Ellis, what are you doing? Because I no longer believe this is retaliation. No, it's education, and we are the students. The council chamber was filled with noise, desperate noise. No longer the curated debates of a galactic superpower, no eloquent diplomats or poised strategists. Now it was shouting, accusations, panic masked as patriotism. I watched from the observation tier as centuries-old alliances cracked in real time. Some demanded full-scale war. Crush Earth before it escalates further, they shouted, as if escalation hadn't already occurred. Others, more pragmatic, argued for concessions, open our archives, apologize for the hidden crimes, offer reparations before the humans did it for us, with proof. And then there were the fearful ones, the quiet factions who whispered of surrender, not with weapons, with truth. Let them broadcast it, let the galaxy judge. A dozen systems had already begun seceding from the Accord, not with fleets, but with silence. They cut ties, shut ports, stopped responding. They feared being associated with what might be revealed next. Better to be forgotten than implicated. We still hadn't heard a word from Earth, not one broadcast, not one demand. And that was what terrified us most. Because if this were about revenge, about payment for the missing 7, they would have already acted. But they hadn't even mentioned those colonists again. They weren't just exposing our past. They were letting us tear ourselves apart. Ellis Grant's name came up during the second phase of the session. Not officially, of course. His file was sealed under diplomatic discretion. But too many of us had seen him now. The footage, the messages, the camera glances that weren't accidental. A Calvarian representative muttered, "He's not just a soldier, he's doctrine." The phrase rippled through the room like cold plasma. Doctrine. What if Grant wasn't acting alone? What if he represented an entire philosophy? One of patience, of deterrence, of calculated exposure. Not military dominance, but informational warfare refined into a creed. What if Earth no longer believed in power through weapons, but through restraint? A war we couldn't even declare because they refused to meet us in battle. A slow suffocation, not with fire, but with truth. Chancellor Krexer finally stood, pale and hollow-eyed. He didn't speak like a leader now. He sounded like a witness. "We taught them diplomacy," he said. "We thought they were learning how to join us." He looked down, but they were learning how to break us. I returned to my chambers that night unsure of what I even believed anymore. Not in humanity, in us, our systems, our sense of superiority. We had spent centuries building an empire of silence and secrets. The humans hadn't toppled it. They simply turned on the lights. And now we can see the rot. It happened during what should have been a routine broadcast window. At the 73rd standard rotation of the 4th cycle, every major comnet across the Accord experienced a synchronized pulse delay, just half a second, barely noticeable. The kind of flicker that would normally be blamed on solar interference. Except this time, it wasn't a glitch. It was a download. The screens didn't go dark. They lit up, one by one, in every known language, in every major city, on every military ship and trading port. A single message appeared across every holo display. "This is not revenge, this is correction." And then the feed opened. We didn't know what we were watching at first. A file directory, nothing fancy, no music, no logos, just cold digital structure, rows of labeled entries. Accord Complicity Archive V1. A click, then another, then a voice, human, female, mid-tone, calm. This entry contains footage from the Delcon sterilization program, conducted without consent on 78 pre-fold civilizations. Viewer discretion is advised. The footage played. There was no commentary, just evidence. Raw, unedited, time-stamped video, lab reports, internal memos, financial transfers, testimonies, names, titles, faces, every file authenticated, every signature real. The drop lasted 6 minutes, and when it ended, nothing else was said. No threats, no speeches, no demands, just silence, followed by hysteria. Across the Accord, protests ignited before governments could issue denials. Leaders resigned. Some vanished. Species once proud of their alliance now turned on their representatives with suspicion and rage. But the worst came not from the public. It came from within. Military officials, ashamed or afraid, began releasing their own internal records preemptively. If the humans already had everything, better to confess now and beg forgiveness than be exposed later. Within 12 hours, 9 more volumes of the archive were circulating, not by human hands, by ours. We were unraveling ourselves. And Earth still said nothing. I sat in my chambers and stared at the pale glow of my terminal screen. Volume 3 loaded automatically. Tiana Accord siege operations suppressed testimony log. Another crime we buried under rhetoric. Another atrocity labeled as necessary containment. Another secret we were sure no one remembered. But someone had remembered. They had remembered everything. The idea struck me with clarity that felt like nausea. Humanity hadn't built a superweapon. They had built a mirror, one big enough to hold the entire Accord. And now we were all being forced to look. I don't know if Ellis Grant orchestrated the archive drop personally, but I do know one thing. He wanted us to live through it. That is perhaps the most human thing of all. They didn't destroy us. They let us destroy ourselves, one truth at a time. The Council ordered a blackout on all interstellar comms 20 hours after the archive drop. A futile gesture. The data had already taken root, replicated across private satellites, domestic servers, even civilian entertainment nodes. You couldn't suppress it. You could only delay your own exposure. But the blackout did achieve one thing. It bought time. Time to make the wrong decision. Traxxas Prime was a symbol, a fortress world, the old capital of the Irix Dominion before their assimilation. The Accord had transformed it into a monument of stability, massive towers of policy and marble, ceremonial courts, cultural archives. And orbiting above it, always visible in the night sky, the solemn crest, our largest diplomatic warship. Armed, but never used, a symbol of power without cruelty. After the collapse of public trust, the Council relocated there. They thought it was safe. It was not. The first sign came as a shift in planetary weather patterns. The polar regulators began cycling early. Not failure, precision control. Someone had accessed the climate systems. Then came the silence. Every orbiting relay, every uplink satellite, every monitoring drone, offline, not destroyed, disabled, all at once. It took less than 4 seconds. And then, at the precise center of the Capitol Plaza, during what was meant to be a unifying address to the people of Traxxas, Ellis Grant appeared, not in person, on every screen. No hacking, no brute force override, just presence. Traxxas was built on peace, he said, voice calm and low. But peace without justice is decoration. It's time for renovation. The image faded. No explosion followed. Instead, the solemn crest, the largest warship never fired, lowered itself from orbit. It hovered, unmanned, precisely 50 meters above the Council Tower. Then it folded, not jumped, folded, collapsing into a localized spatial ripple that sucked itself into a non-reactive sphere of light and vanished. No debris, no damage, just absence. The only human-made message afterward? That was a warning. And suddenly we understood. Humanity wasn't showing restraint. They were issuing ultimatums in silence. We combed through sensor logs, trying to find how they commandeered the ship. They didn't. The solemn crest hadn't been hacked. It had been rebuilt from the inside, quietly, over months, possibly years. Subsystems replaced with indistinguishable duplicates, code overwritten in fragments. No alarms triggered. We had been flying a human weapon without knowing it. The symbolism was unbearable. Our symbol of peace used to show us what power actually looks like. No death, no blood, just clarity. That night, the Council disbanded in all but name. Some fled. Others denied ever having attended. The Chancellor vanished, perhaps defected, perhaps silenced. And still, Earth said nothing. Not a single ship crossed our border. Not one troop landed. We were already conquered, not through war, through design. 3 days after Traxxas Prime fell, the last Council fragment met on an emergency signal node drifting above a dead moon. We weren't leaders anymore, just frightened voices clinging to titles that no longer meant anything. There was no agenda, no protocol. Just one desperate question. What do the humans want? No one knew. That was the problem. If they demanded tribute, territory, apologies, anything, we could have negotiated. But they hadn't spoken, hadn't moved. They had already won and still refused to act like conquerors. It was Ellis Grant who ended the silence. The message came through private relay. Not wide broadcast, not for show. Just a direct address to the remaining Council delegates. It was a short file, 17 seconds. The peace treaty was a lie, he said, calm as ever. But we honored it anyway. A pause, a breath. We wanted to see if you'd change on your own. He looked into the camera, not cold, not cruel, but measured. You didn't. Then a data file attached, a single-page agreement, titled plainly in standard trade dialect. The human clause. There were no threats in it, no ultimatums, just a stipulation. Any unprovoked death of a human citizen, regardless of location, jurisdiction, or context, would constitute an act of total war. The clause didn't define total. It didn't need to. Attached were 17 planetary schematics, not blueprints, grave markers. Each one marked simulated response time, confirmed. Entire worlds, vaporized in theory. And the chilling part? They weren't Accord targets, they were ours. Homeworlds, trade hubs, cultural sanctuaries. Places we thought invulnerable. Grant didn't threaten to attack. He showed us he already knew how. The clause ended with one final line, devoid of flourish. Peace is our choice. Make sure it remains yours. We ratified it without debate. All of us. Even the ones who still insisted humans were emotionally volatile or too young to lead. Their hands shook as they pressed the biometric seals. Because none of us wanted to find out what would happen if even one human went missing again. The human clause spread faster than any treaty in recorded history. Over 900 species signed it within 2 days. Not because they agreed, but because they were afraid not to. The galaxy changed without fireworks. No flags planted, no planets seized. Just a shift in posture. Every major corridor rerouted to avoid Earth space. New AI protocols banned simulating combat against human tactics. Recruitment materials quietly dropped comparisons between primitive species and evolved members. And above it all, silence. Earth didn't gloat, didn't celebrate. They returned to business. Their diplomats resumed trade negotiations. Their scientists published papers. Their colonists expanded, slowly, respectfully, but without hesitation. Because now, everyone understood the humans weren't trying to dominate the galaxy. They just wanted to be left alone, but if pushed, if lied to again, they would end the game. I still remember the first time I heard a human laugh, not the polished laughter from their diplomats or broadcast personalities. No, the real kind. It was in a trade port docking bay, years ago, long before the treaty. 2 technicians, humans, filthy from engine soot, sharing some awful-smelling drink and telling jokes about vacuum seals. At the time, I found it grating, crude, loud, uncivilized. I would give anything to hear it again now, because that laugh held something I didn't understand then. Confidence. Not arrogance, not bluster. The kind of confidence that comes from a species that has crawled through its own blood and come out smiling. I've spent a lifetime analyzing power structures, studying civilizations, predicting collapse, advising empires. But no model we ever used accounted for what Earth became. They were never playing our game. They were building a new one beneath our feet. We never lost those 7. Those words still echo in my mind. They were the seed. The moment we should have known something wasn't right. We thought them a bluff, a distraction. But now I know they weren't talking about the colonists. They were talking about themselves. They never lost their people, their unity, their vision. We tried to manipulate them with treaties and trade routes. We tried to marginalize them through mockery and placement. We tried to test them by removing their own. But they never reacted like we expected. They waited, watched. And when the time came, they didn't rise in fury. They rose in silence. We expected rage. They gave us calculation. We expected escalation. They gave us restraint. We expected revenge. They gave us proof. And in that proof, we found the mirror, cracks and all. The peace treaty, yes, it was a lie. But it wasn't their lie, it was ours. We signed it to pretend we were still in control, to cage them politely, to pat them on the head and say, "Welcome to the stars." But they knew, from the beginning. And they smiled and nodded and prepared. Because peace was never about weakness. It was a test, and we failed it. I've taken a post now far from the galactic core, a small listening station on the edge of human trade space. I monitor communications, route logistics. Sometimes I hear the laughter again, crackling over an open channel. Technicians, miners, pilots. And I feel something, not fear, not anymore. Something colder, respect. Humanity is not our enemy, not unless we force them to be. They walk among us now with quiet eyes, open hands, careful movements. And every diplomat, every general, every leader who looks into those eyes, they understand. You don't lie to humanity, not twice.